Hello, everybody, and welcome back. My continuation of my book reading of Stephen King's Later. Here we go. That Christmas was excellent. I got cool presents from both of them. And we had an early lunch at Chinese Tuxedo before Liz had to go to work because she said crime never takes a holiday. So Mom and me went to an old place on Park Avenue. Mom stayed in touch with Mr. Briquette after we moved, and sometimes the three of us hung out. Because he's lonely, Mom said, but also because why, Jimmy? Because we like him, I said, and that was true. We had Christmas dinner in his apartment. Actually, turkey sandwiches with cranberry sauce from Zabar's. Because his daughter was on the West Coast and couldn't come back. I found out more about that later. And yes, because we liked him. As I may have told, Mr. Briquette was actually Professor Briquette, now emeritus, which I understood to mean that he was retired but still allowed to hang around NYU and teach the occasional class in his super smart specialty, which happened to be E&E, English and European Literature. I once made this mistake of calling it lit, and he corrected me, saying lit was either for lights or being drunk. Anyway, even with no stuffing and only carrots for veg, or it was a little nice meal, and we had more presents after. I gave Mr. Briquette a snow globe for his collection. I later found out it had been his wife's collection, but he admired it, thanked me, and put it on the mantle with the others. Mom gave him a big book called The New Annotated Sherlock Holmes, because back when he was working full-time, he taught a course called Mystery and Gothic in English Fiction. He gave Mom a locket that he said had belonged to his wife. Mom protested and said he should save it for his daughter. Mr. Briquette said that Theobald had gotten all the good pieces of Mona's jewelry, and besides, if you snooze, you lose. Meaning, I guess, that if his daughter, from the sound of it, I thought her name was Theovan, couldn't bother to come east, she could go whistle. And I sort of agree with that, because who knew how many more Christmases she might have her father around. He was older than God. Besides, I had a soft spot for fathers. Not having one myself, I know they say can't miss what you never had. And there's some truth in that, but I knew I was missing something. My present from Mr. Briquette was also a book. It was called 20 Unexpurgated Fairy Tales. Do you know what unexpurgated means, Jamie? Once a professor, always a professor, I guess. I shook my head. What do you reckon? He was leaning forward with his big gnarly hands between his skinny thighs, smiling. Can you guess from the context of the title? Uncensored? Like R-rated? Nailed it, he said. Well done. I hope there's not a lot of sex in them, Mom said. He reads a high school level, but he's only 9. No sex, but good old violence, Mr. Briquette said. Called him professor in these days, because it seemed struck up somehow. For instance, the original tale of Cinderella, which you'll find here, the wicked stepsisters. Mom turned to me and stage whispered, spoiler alert, Mr. Briquette was not to be. He was in full teaching mode. I didn't mind. It was interesting. In the original, the wicked stepsisters cut off their toes in their efforts to make the glass slipper fit. Ooh, I said this in a way that meant gross. Tell me more. And the glass slipper wasn't glass at all, Jimmy. It seemed to have been a translation error, which had been immortalized by Walt Disney. The homogenizer of fairy tales. The slipper was actually made of squirrel fur. Wow, I said. Non-interesting as the stepsisters cutting off their toes, but I wanted to keep them rolling. In the original story of the Frog King, the princess doesn't kiss the frog. Instead, she... No more, Mom said. Let him read the stories and find out for himself. Always best, Mr. Briquet agreed. And perhaps we'll discuss them, Jamie. You mean you'll discuss them while I listen, I thought. But that would be okay. Should we have hot chocolate? Mom asked. It's also from Zabar. And they make the best. I can reheat it in the jiff. Leon McDuff, Mr. Briquet said. And damned be him that first cries, hold enough, which means yes. And we had it with whipped cream. In my memory, that's the best Christmas I had as a kid. From the Santa pancakes Liz made in the morning to the hot chocolate in Mr. Briquet's apartment. Just down the hall from where Mom and I used to live. New Year's Eve was also fine, although I fell asleep on the couch between Mom and Liz before the ball dropped. All good. But in 2010, the arguments started. Before that, Liz and my mother used to have what Mom called spirited discussions, mostly about books. They liked many of the same writers. They bond over Regis Thomas, remember? And the same movies. But Liz thought my mother was too focused on things like tales and advances, and various writers, track records instead of the stories. And she actually laughed at the work of a couple of Mom's clients, calling them subliterate. To which my mom responded that those subliterate writers paid the rent, kept the lights on, kept them lit. Not to mention paying for the care home where Uncle Harry was marinating in his own pee. Then the arguments began to move away from the more or less safe grounds of books and films and got more heated. Some were about politics. Liz loved this Congress guy, John Boehner. My mother called him John Boner, which is what some kids of the acquaintance called a stiffy. Or maybe she meant to pull a boner. I don't really think so. Mom thought Nancy Pelosi, another politician, which you probably know as she's still around, was a brave woman working in a boys' club. Liz thought she was your basic liberal dingleberry. The biggest fight they ever had about politics was when Liz said she didn't completely believe Obama had been born in America. Mom called her stupid and racist. They were in their bedroom with the door shut. That was where most of their arguments happened, but their voices were raised and I could hear every word from the living room. A few minutes later, Liz left, slammed the door on her way out, and didn't come back for almost a week. When she did, they made up in the bedroom with the door closed. I heard that too, because the making up part was pretty noisy. Groans and laughter and squeaky bed springs. They argued about police tactics too. And this was still a few years before Black Lives Matter. That was a sore point with Liz, as you might guess. Mom decried what she called racial profiling. And Liz said you can only draw a profile if the features are clear. Didn't get that then. Don't get it now. Mom said when black people and white people were sentenced for the same type of crime, it was the black people who got hit with the heaviest sentences, and sometimes the white people didn't do time at all. This countered by saying, you show me a Martin Luther King Boulevard in any city, and I'll show you a high crime area. The arguments started to come closer together, and even at my tender age, I knew one big reason why. They were drinking too much. Hot breakfast with my mother used to make twice or even 3 times a week pretty much ceased. I'd come out in the morning and they'd be sitting there in their matching bathrobes, hunched over mugs, coffee, their faces pale and their eyes wet. There'd be 3, sometimes 4 empty bottles of wine in the trash with cigarette butts in them. My mother would say, get some juice and cereal for yourself while I get dressed, Timmy. And Liz would tell me not to make a lot of noise because the aspirin hadn't kicked in. Her head was splitting, and she either had to call or was on a stakeout for some case or another. Not the Thumper task force, though. She didn't get on that. I drink my juice and eat my cereal quiet as a mouse on those mornings. By the time Mom was dressed and ready to walk me to school, ignoring Liz's comment that I was now big enough to make that walk by myself, she was starting to come around. All of this seemed normal to me. I don't think the world starts to come into focus until you're 15 or 16. Up until then, you just take what you got and roll with it. Those 2 hungover women hunched over their coffee was just how I started my day on some mornings that eventually became lots of mornings. I didn't even notice the smell of wine that began to permeate everywhere. Only part of me must have noticed because years later, in college, when my roomie spilled the bottle as in fondle in the living room of our little apartment, it all came back, and it was like getting hit in the face with a plank. Liz's snarly hair, my mother's hollow eyes, how I knew, too close to the cupboard where we kept the cereal slowly and quietly. I told my roomie I was going down to the 7-Eleven to get a pack of cigarettes. Yes, I eventually picked up that particular bad habit. But basically, I just had to get away from that smell. Given the choice between seeing dead folks, yes, I still see them, and the memories brought on by the smell of spilled wine, I pick the dead folks any day of the fucking week. And with this, I'm gonna stop it here for my continuation of my book reading of Stephen King's Later. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next part. Take care. Bye bye.